everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Bowhunter Chronicles podcast. We're doing this one Zoom. John is on vacation and he's got no service. So I had the opportunity to sit down here. I got everything set up here in the basement, still waiting on internet out to the studio. So I'm just going to do it here. And I've got Bill Thompson with Spartan Forge on the phone on the chat here today. And he's got a product that he's been developing for quite some time that is going to take a little bit of explaining. We were just talking here, and I looked at it. I did one of these with him on the Vitals Live a week or so ago, a couple weeks ago now, and to be honest with you, when it was brought up and I was trying to do some research on it, I was like, I can't wrap my head around it. And then after talking to Bill, I've just been blowing up my friends saying, like, you can't even imagine, like, it's like literally like mind blown, like crazy, interesting, how it's going to come to fruition. And it's whether the hardcores like it or not, it's something that's coming, whether it's Bill or Bill Gates, I guess. So first of all, how you doing tonight, Bill? And can we get a little introduction from you?
Sure. Yeah. So my name's Bill Thompson. I'm an active duty military guy. I've been in for about 20 years, and the majority of my career has been spent doing intelligence work, trying to locate bad guys for in the Army, kinetic forces, basically guys who are going to go out and do the operation. And the Army over the past maybe about 15 years has been trying to come up with new and interesting ways to do this that makes sense. And kind of one of the things that we have as a military right now, or as a government, and everybody has access to tons of data. So you have tons of different data points, and they are, there's a lot of it. It's tough for a person or even a group of people to look at this data and draw any meaningful conclusions. Humans by our nature are pattern recognition agents. Our everything we do is pattern recognition. We look at something visually, or we hear something, or we smell something, and we associate that with a pattern of behavior, and then we apply a pattern of behavior towards it. So that's the essence of, as well, with machine learning. It's taking droves and droves of data and applying machine learning, which is just pattern recognition. And the reason machine learning, or it's called artificial intelligence, is because it's assembling neurons, and there's, you can think of it simply as like 3 decisions that get processed through a neuron, and that neuron is mimicking the way that we use the human brain, how the human brain works. And so in the military, I started doing this work probably 10 years ago or so. We were trying to take all of this data and draw meaningful conclusions about it, and then use these things as indicators for the war fighter, and saying, we have a good idea that bad guy A or bad guy B is over here, and here's how we did it. Here's how we went through that process. So as I was doing this work, whether it was in Afghanistan or in Iraq, or a lot of people didn't even know we were at war for years in the southern Philippines. Since I'd say about 2010, we were at war in the southern Philippines. So in all 3 of those locations, the question had to be answered: where are the bad guys at now, and then where are they going to be, or where could they be that it would be advantageous for us to do an interdiction, and then get hands on them or put them out of commission. So that's pretty much my military career in a nutshell, or what I've been doing. And I've done it for regular forces, special forces, special missions units, special operations guys, every different type of military unit that's getting after these bad guys, I've done it for. And as I was doing this, I grew up as a hunter. In North Dakota, it was mostly rifle hunting for me, at least when I was younger, and I didn't take it seriously. It was just kind of like an annual thing that we did. And then as I was older, a buddy of mine got me into bow hunting. And during a lot of my Army career, did do a lot of bow hunting because I was always gone, deployed somewhere doing something, or I didn't have time to do the scouting, or most of the time I was gone. But when I was downrange, I realized a lot of the ways that we're ingesting data and doing this pattern analysis, like I talked about before, translated directly to whitetail hunting, and all of that data was already out there. So whether that's tagging data, social media data that people are putting online, wildlife studies that are being published, academic studies that are being published, and specifically as of late for us, last about 4 years we've been doing this, it's been GPS data and social media data and academic studies. And we've been putting that all together and trying to answer these same types of questions for hunters that I've been answering for the military for many years. And that is, where is my target now? What are the tendencies of my target? How do I exploit the tendencies of my target to create some kind of, to increase the odds for me in some way, shape, or form? So that's the two, those are the efforts of my life, and that's kind of how they line up. So yeah, I guess that's the history. That's the long and the short of it. So as a company, what we've been doing for the past, seriously for the past 4 years, is gathering as much of this data as we can and making as much sense of it as possible, and making sure that it's it's based in truth as much as possible, and then making those predictions for the hunter. And we've gotten our product to a point now where it performs quite well, and we're ready to put it on the market here on 1 September.
Okay, so let's back up a little bit
Sure.
through all of that, and I mean, I'll be beaten up here if I don't say, thank you for your service and all of that,
Thanks for your patriotism.
Yes.
And thank you for your service as well, right?
Yeah, I was young and said, you know what, I can do a lot of things, and I will see how much I can challenge myself. And turns out I'm good at drinking beer and being an asshole. So the Marines was perfect.
Yeah, we're right up my alley. Yeah, for me, I was 17, and I thought to myself, I'm not a farmer, and I'm not a banker, and I'm not a waiter. So how the hell do I get out of here? And the military came calling, and all the girls liked that guy in his uniform, and I thought I could do that.
Yep.
So same thing.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's a lot of people that are like that. So you said that you grew up hunting in North Dakota as kind of as an aside. I guess as you progressed and with your military training and everything like that, how did your hunting style start, and where did it evolve to?
Yeah, so it kind of started with, especially because when I first started hunting, I was hunting at my bow hunting. I was hunting at my mother's property, and out in North Dakota, there's not a lot of pressure, or at least there wasn't when I started. So for me, it was kind of like, all right, I know there's these things called scrapes. There's gonna be a scrape line along this field. Let me get down low. Wait for these scrapes to show up, and I'll get downwind of them, and then hopefully I'll see something, and I, would take out some pretty decent, 3.5-year-old deer and some does, and get the job done, or, leave some standing corn in the middle of a field. And that was kind of how my hunting progressed. And then after I initially started bow hunting seriously, I started deploying a lot. And then it came to a point where I only had access to public land. And out in on the East Coast is where I was mostly, and in Maryland it's very difficult to get onto public or onto private land. It's very locked down there, and I think they have one of the highest bow hunters per square miles. So I started initially just walking into the middle of the woods and throwing a stand on the side of a tree and seeing nothing, and just like, why am I not seeing anything? Like, I know there's food here, there's an agricultural field. I used to hunt this agricultural area near Beltsville, Maryland, where there was, always agriculture in the fields, and it was public land that you could get on. And I'd sit in the woods, on a setup that would work great in North Dakota, 30 yards inside of a agricultural field, and just wait for the deer to come by. But it was so heavily hunted that the deer weren't getting on those fields until 10:30 p.m., 11 p.m. Everyone had been on the field since 6:30, and then the deer are just starting to come in. And I was getting frustrated because I just couldn't figure it out. Like, what am I doing wrong? And that's kind of when I started doing a lot of reading. And one of the authors that I read was Charlie Alsheimer. And they say in life, don't meet your heroes, but I got to meet Charlie and hang out with him and go hunting with him. And he was a great guy. He died a couple of years ago, but he was a prolific whitetail hunter and a layman scientist. And while I was reading his books, and I started to kind of figure out, I need to zero in and get closer to these bucks towards their beds, but I wasn't doing anything as aggressive as maybe I'm doing now, especially on public land. I was still, hunting transition and laying off the bedding, and I didn't want to spook them out of their bedding. And then, I started seeing more deer in Maryland. And then I thought, this still isn't getting the job done. And then it progressed for me to public land, and I've got to be willing to put more boots on the ground than most people are willing to do. So I found the biggest piece of public land I could in Maryland at the time, which was Green Ridge State Forest. And I just scouted all of the time. Like I think I spent 2 or 3 summers of just like 30 or 35 trips. And then I trained my dog to become a shed hunter, and I would take him up there with me. And he was a really good shed hunter. And I would map everything out and mark everything and find. And then at that point, I was more of like a choke point hunter. And I would find, as much of the most sign I could, and then get on a choke point and then wait for peak rut, which in Maryland is kind of right before the gun season starts. And started to, kill some pretty good public land deer, like 120, 140 inch deer. And then after that, then I started getting on. I had read a book called, it's a guy named Herndon, I think was his name. And
Brad Herndon, Mapping Trophy.
Brad Herndon, yeah. That's what it was. And it was Mapping Bucks. And that one kind of opened my eyes up even more. And that's while I was doing the stuff downrange in the military. And at that time is when I started seeing the similarities. I was like, okay, they're constrained. I'd said it earlier, was identify the tendencies and then exploit them. And one of the tendencies that became evident to me was they were constrained by movement and they were constrained by wind. They want to bed, especially bucks, with wind at their advantage. So they could see in front of them and have their wind to their back. So even though that's their strength, you can still try to tilt that in your favor and use it against them to make it their weakness. And that's when we were doing similar things in Afghanistan. You could think or in Iraq as well. There was one road between this area where we knew they were and this area where they had to go if they wanted to conduct operations. So we either fly drones in the air, or we do interdictions on the routes, or we, ruin the route, and it's the same thing hunters were doing. So that's when it kind of made sense to me, was use whatever their advantage is and try to make it their disadvantage as much as possible. So I started getting closer and closer into the bedding areas. And then I found online, other hunters who were doing this like very aggressive style of hunting. And for me, that's, when I started killing my biggest deer, was when I really started hunting them in their beds, like, maybe 60 to 90 yards off their beds. And got lucky a couple times and killed what I thought, was a pretty big deer in Maryland, and in North Dakota, going home to North Dakota on hunting public land. So that's kind of a really long explanation to say, for me, it was try, fail, but always be willing to first have a high threshold for failure and realize, especially when you're hunting public land where it's heavily pressured, that you should just be happy when you see a deer. And then secondarily after that, realizing, okay, now if I'm going to do these calculations and realize that this is the prime piece of bedding on this property, and knowing that a buck might have upwards of 20 prime bedding locations on a property, and that no other deer are going to be in there, get used to the fact that I might be seeing 1 deer a month. 1 buck. If I'm hunting a buck location where I'm seeing bedding, and I'm in the hill country of Maryland, which is kind of like northwestern Maryland, really get used to the fact that I might sit 20 times until I see that one buck that I know is out there, because I've been seeing chest high rubs around there, but this guy's really dynamic with his area. And that was a story for a pretty good public land buck I killed in 2017. And I just kept hunting bedding areas and kept hunting bedding areas. And it paid off for me. But it was getting used to the fact that if I wanted to just see deer, I could do that by hunting pinch points. But if I wanted to kill big deer, I needed to level set my expectations and accept failure, as being the norm, as being the happenstance. And I wish it had gone quicker for me. Unfortunately, everything I just described to you took probably 12 years or so. But, understanding all of that and understanding those constraints, and then also understanding that academics are tagging bucks with GPS collars and they're tagging does with GPS collars, and that social media and everyone wants to report the bucks that they're killing online, and that insurance agencies know exactly when peak car collision is happening state by state and county by county, and understanding that QDMA and other whitetail agencies are publishing these studies year after year saying, here's peak conception, here's the biggest deer that have been killed in the state, here is what the hunter to deer ratios are for taking all of that data and drawing those same patterns. It just for me, it clicks and it makes obvious sense, especially when you're dealing with like the car collision data and the GPS data. Like, those numbers can't be faked. Like the tendencies that you get from that have to be the tendencies, because you have such a prolific amount of information that there's no way for an outlier to get a vote, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And what's interesting about that, and I mean, that sounds like the normal progression as far as that like 12-year. I mean, I've been listening to a lot of different podcasts, and it's time in the woods. You have to, unless you have like a great mentor, and even, I mean, it could be argued that, I had a great mentor, but you have to listen to him, right? So
Yeah.
if you're not paying attention, or you're not doing that, and you talk about the car deer collisions, like my father-in-law, he used to be a garbage man, right? I mean, we got a segment on here, Tales from the Garbage Man, about all the bad things that he's eaten and the things that he's done bad, and all these things that you find in the garbage. But it was almost cheating, because he would be driving back and forth on the highway, back and forth from the dump to these commercial areas. And when he started to see more bucks laying dead on the side of the road, then that was when we needed to be in the woods. That was when that activity was picking up. So that's interesting. So what you said, like 2017 is when it kind of all like came together or whatever, but you said you've been working on this for many years. How did you, I guess, have you been implementing that, the technology and the things that you've been using throughout this whole process?
So
since you started to put those patterns together?
Yeah, so the first time I started implementing technology was in about 2013. And what I did was I wired up some properties that I hunted with, the easiest way to explain it is like a vibration sensor, or it's called an accelerometer. And I had used there's this great website for engineers called Adafruit, where you can order like Arduinos and custom made PCBs. And basically I wired up my own 900 megahertz wireless deer camera area on these properties I was hunting, one in North Dakota and one in Maryland. And I knew the areas where deer were always scraping and rubbing on trees. I knew which trees they like to rub on because of the scent, or their ability to leave scent deposits behind on the trees. And there was always scraping in the same areas, especially there's always like the same area year after year on this one farm where there was always these big primary scrapes. So what I did was I took these accelerometers and put them all, because they're cheaper than cameras were, and I put them all over the property, and then I put weather vanes all over the property. And all I was trying to do was first determine if there was an actual pattern in the way that they move, because it wasn't evident to me at that time that there was actually a pattern and that they weren't all individuals, because deer can be very individualistic. And at that time I thought, maybe all of these lunar forecasts and rising pressure, lowering pressure, 10%, cloud cover guys were full of malarkey. And I wanted to see it for myself. So I just put these accelerometers everywhere, and I knew when deer were going on trails, I would get sent. I would get it would report back. I knew when they were scraping and rubbing on trees, and I could look at all of the peaks in the data. And then what I was doing was just in an Excel spreadsheet. This was before we got into machine learning. I was just marking it all down, and then I'd look at the bell curves that it produced and the weather that was happening at those times. And when I started doing that, I got very accurate with knowing, okay, this buck is always scraping on this field when it's this wind between this temperature. And it wasn't because he, made a conscious decision to do that. It was because he could scent check these scrapes and knew if they needed freshening based on the wind. So for him, it was a pragmatic decision, or I shouldn't even say pragmatic, instinctual decision. But he would only hit the scrape line when this wind was coming. So I knew, okay, if I want to kill this buck, which I did, he was a big 4x4, I need to be on this field at this time because I've seen him there so many times. And that was when I started getting the patterns out of data. And then my next decision became, okay, how can I get so much data that there's no way that I won't be able to understand how the general deer moves, right? So, and stop me if I'm not making sense or if I'm going too far afield. But basically, from an evolutionary perspective, every deer, just like every human, kind of comes with wiring, right? By the way that we thermal regulate, the times of the year for deer, when they're moving, when they're mating, crepuscular movement, how cervids move, how mammals move. There's bell curves there when you can observe millions and millions of movements. So at that point, I started reaching out to, and this would have been 2014 into 2015, I just started blast emailing every researcher I could and saying, hey, here's what I'm doing on my farms here with these accelerometers, and I'm seeing some pretty meaningful trends with this data. Are you guys able to share your GPS data with me so that I might be able to extrapolate even more meaningful pattern from this information? So now instead of just looking at my 30-some deer on those two farms, now I was able to look at the patterns of 70 deer over 4 years, and then now what are the general patterns of those deer? Okay, now I get a proliferation of data for the southeast. It's like, okay, I have a pretty good idea of how the southeastern deer moves. It's like, all right, I need to move northeast. So I might go up north to another researcher and say, look, I've got this good model that I've trained using machine learning, both for the tagging of the data, because there's millions of data points, and then for the prediction of that data. And if you give me your data from up here, from the Northeast, I can do two things for you. I can tell you what the patterns are that we're finding up here, and I can also tell you how they might differ from the South. And then if you have questions relating to that, we can, me and my guys can look at that and tell you, here's how they differ, and these are the things they differ on. And, I was able to find some good researchers some researchers are horrible about sharing data, and I understand why, but some of them just really hold on to it, and you have a hard time understanding why. And then some researchers are more than willing to share. And we were able to get, with the exception of the Northeast, we really have good data from all over the US. We really have a very good understanding of how the general deer moves. And I guess a point of contact for your listeners might be, as we ingest new GPS data, so maybe I'll break this down for you just to make sure this hits home, is that, so a deer has a GPS collar on, and that it might be taking it somewhere every 30 minutes, somewhere every 5 minutes, and then somewhere every hour. You get a hit on the GPS tag, and it says, here is exactly where this deer is in the field. And this GPS collar stays on this deer for, at least usually a year. Some of them were as long as 7 years. And So we get that and we use it to train our neural network. And what I mean by training our neural network is we are saying, here's how deer have moved in the past as differences in topography, vegetation, and weather present themselves. Here's how they generally react to that. Okay, so we get a ton of that data. And then we train a model, and the model says, okay, I think I have a good understanding of how deer will negotiate property and when they will be most active. In other words, we like to say, an easy way of saying is, when are they going to be risking themselves more to feed or mate? In other words, walking during daylight hours when they're huntable. So the machine makes a prediction based on that, and then we train it, and then we have a model that can do prediction. And then we might reach out to someone else and say, hey, we've got this model that predicts quite well right now. We would like to use your data that we've never seen before and get the dates that you have this data for, look those historical dates up, and then pose that question to the network and say, how do you think these deer that were tagged for this time period, when do you think they were moving the most, moving the least, and then where do you think they were moving, and where do you think they weren't moving? Okay? And then we ask the machine that question. The machine makes a prediction, and then we compare that. We look at the delta with the actual truth data, which is how they moved. And then if there's a big disparity, which we're at the point now where we're not getting them, but we were getting big disparities early on because deer move for a variety of reasons, especially from the north to the south for different reasons. If there was a disparity, then we would train that data. We would include that in the calculus that the machine was learning to make the prediction. And then what we ended up doing is regionalizing it. So we would, as we have a ton of southeastern data, we would bias that data and give it more of a vote than we would northern data. And then if we're making a prediction up north, then we would bias the data to the north. But there's a lot of overlap. And right now, we're in the realm of about 65% to 70% of the time, which I think is getting towards the top, but I'm not sure how far up it can go. But 65 to 70% of the time, we're dead on accurate to, as we ingest new data, we're 65 to 70% accurate on were the deer moving a lot or a little these days, and where were they moving? And the machine predicts that well. So you could think of it as an automated, it sounds kind of stupid to say, but it's the truth. You can think of it as an automated reasoning system for a deer, if that makes sense.
So a couple things, like from the beginning of that, it makes me think like for people that cheat on tests, right?
Yeah.
You might spend so much time like writing out, copying down all the answers, and then by the time you get to the test, you're like, I already know the answers. It kind of sounds like what you were saying by figuring all this out. And then it's also some like mad scientist type shit about building like all these motion sensors all over your property.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy. Like when you were telling like old Joe Bob down the road in North Dakota what was going on your farm, what were the people saying, or the people in Maryland, when you were telling like regular hunters like what the hell you were doing? Or did you?
So I actually told no one.
Yeah,
I actually did not tell a person because I thought, this might not work and be dumb, and I might be risking my neck as like an engineer in the military. Like, you're an idiot. What are you trying to do? But then secondly, I thought, if this works, I might have something here. So I actually told no one except for the guys that I ended up going to business with, who are both electrical engineers and data scientists, what I was doing. And it was tough because when we really started to get accuracy from the models, like keeping your lips sealed was so difficult because I felt like we were sitting on something that was going to go somewhere. So I actually told no one besides like my mother and, at the time, my kids. I might say, this is what I'm doing, or this is why we're going to go hang this crazy looking thing from this tree over here. I kind of told no one. And so I should also go back to the point you were saying about the test answers for the tests. That's an interesting, so in machine learning and in neural networks, there's a concept called overfitting. And basically what overfitting means is, say I'm trying to train a neural network to recognize a cat, right? I could train it on images of cats And then when I want to test it, I could pluck one of those pictures from the training data and then ask the machine, what is this? And of course, because I've already told it that it's a cat, it's going to recognize, oh, this is a cat. And that's a very simplistic way of describing a concept that's called overfitting. But one way to get around that, or to make sure that you are not training your model to be too specific, is you should test it with photos that it's never seen. So you show it a cat from every which angle, and you show it thousands of different, subspecies of cat. And then when you want to test it, you go out and you take a brand new picture of a cat. And then, a good model will recognize, okay, this is a cat. But then a great model will say, this is the same cat as another picture, if that makes sense. So that's kind of how you go ahead.
Yeah, that wasn't what I was saying. I remember you, the last time we spoke, you talked a little bit about that. What I was talking about is you had 12 years of experience and kind of figured out how to kill these deer, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you already knew like the answers there, like, and so you were just trying to cut down the learning curve for the next guy or something, because it sounds like you did all the work to figure out. You went through all the painstaking stuff to figure out how to start killing these deer, and then said, well, damn it, I'm gonna go mad scientist and figure this out.
Yeah, like at the time it was just, how do I get as much data as possible? And I started with just, F it, I'll collect the data on my own.
I don't know if your microphone just quit or what.
Can you hear me?
It just went like tin can on me.
Huh.
Okay, now you're better.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're good.
My apologies. So at first I said to myself, I don't know where I'm going to get this much data. Maybe I just need to start producing it on my own. And I flirted in the very beginning with the idea of trying to sell these accelerometers, so people could just, hack their property with these intelligence producing sensors. And it just, trying to compete in the camera market or the sensor market, I guess this would be, is so cutthroat. And just the money is not there, because these other camera companies, are designing their cameras and they're sending them off to China and they're making them, and then they sell them at like 3 to 5% over. And it's just, how cheap can we make this camera? And being in the trade space that I was in the military, it didn't really appeal to me. And I thought there's got to be a better way to train a network to do this prediction. And that's kind of when it hit me that, there's people out there doing GPS studies for a million different reasons. And it doesn't matter what the reason for their study was, I can use their data. And it just worked. And so I guess that's the long and the short of that.
Yeah, super interesting, because that's what I was thinking, but I think the question that's going to be posed most, or where it's going to take to click, is so like today I looked at, I've got this all, we hunt in Michigan, I'm in Michigan, so there's all these spots where there's hunters and hunters and hunters. And I did the same thing that you did. I found the biggest piece of property that I've never been on before. And I started hunting it 2 years ago, just for the simple fact that it was huge. I can get away from guys, and there's got to be good deer on there. So I'm trying to figure that out. I went on a 3.5 mile loop today, from spots that I found on base map in areas that I've never been, looking at things that I, from the aerials, from looking at deer trails, from knowing the terrain in and around the area. I can look at the map and kind of think of what it's going to be. And it turns out that I was actually quite wrong. Some things that I thought were swamp and that were listed as swamp, there was no water, and it was just these big grass fields, which was really interesting to me when I got out there. But how does, what you're doing say, I mean, how can you say on that piece of property, this is where you need to be? Or, I mean, it sounds like more of like a when you need to be.
Yeah.
from our discussions before. But as to the where, and then what do you say to guys that say like, this is cheating, or this is, you know, you should have to figure it out the same way that I did, or is it not to the 9-digit grid type?
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. So what we are releasing on 1 September answers the when, and we call it a common operating picture. When you type in a zip code or you type in the area that you're hunting at, it basically gives you a representation of the land on a map. Which it doesn't have the functionality right now that you would get from like a base map, but it's got the predominant wind and like a wind rose for the area. And it's got the highs and lows, the averages for a defined period of time. And right now you can do like 14 days, a month, the last year, or the last 30. I think we're up to 30 years of data. So the first thing we're fielding is just going to answer the question of when. That's what's coming out the door on 1st September. In other words, for the zip code that you typed in, these are the days in the next 10 days when you should either be scouting in the field or you should be hunting. So that's the first thing that is coming up. The second thing, which we will probably be beta testing towards the end of the year, is going to say, now this is where you should be in the field. And it answers that question by understanding where deer in pressured and unpressured environments have chosen their bedding areas based on things like topography, wind, vegetation, and transition. So when you get a machine that's learning, for instance, we can separate our data out, so we're only looking at 3.5-year-old and plus bucks, right? And most of these areas are areas that are hunted, that we're getting GPS data from. So on all of these properties, when these weather conditions were present and these topographic features were present, this is how a buck chose to safely bed on this area. So if it was a predominantly northern wind and he had a southern facing ridge, he would bed a third to a quarter, sometimes halfway down that ridge, so that the wind's flowing over his back and that he can see out in front of him. And he especially liked doing it in this area where it was transitioned between cedars and oak trees. So, and you can see that transition on the map. So you get enough bucks that bed like that, and then the machine says, oh, every time you have transition on the leeward side of a ridge of a mountain in an area like this, you're going to see bucks bedding there. So the machine says, okay, under these circumstances, I would bed here. So that's kind of how it does the where. And it's very weather and temperature dependent. Weather changes how bucks bed in areas, as we all know. And I would say that there are guys out there who get it about 80% right. I think there are other nuances with bedding that we don't quite, maybe people talk about them, but I don't think they talk about them as prolifically as they should. And that happens with really the overlooked spots and the areas where just people think deer won't be. One of the ones I'm always reminded of that I talk with guys whenever they, ask me about this is it's a hunting area where guys have to park in a parking lot, and there's a massive culvert, like one of those 8-foot like tall culverts, and they all walk on a path that goes over the culvert into the field to hunt. And we knew where the hunters were going in this public land area. So when you plotted it out, you could see some of these guys are going back a long ways, 2.5, 3 miles. Well, there was a 4.5-year-old 140 class buck that was bedding right next to that culvert in like 6-foot tall, I think from the map it looked like cattails. I've never been actually on the ground, or some kind of long grass. It was kind of difficult to tell, but he would bed in that area where it transitioned. He was on the downwind side of this really thick area where it transitioned into like sapling, what looked like sapling pine trees. And so what's funny about this is guys had pictures of this deer on that property, and they got the go ahead to harvest this deer, and they're walking in 2.5 or 3 miles, not knowing that every time they went to hunt that property, they were within about 75 to 100 feet of him. Yeah. And they would walk past him. And there's more than just one of those types of stories. So, and the machine with that and other intel, other things that we're teaching it, is going to try to show users more than just those leeward transition sides of ridges. It's going to try to show them this is places that the general hunter might ignore, especially when we start dealing with companies that retain mapping data and GPS points. We're going to start training a machine on here's how the general hunter hunts, because there are really simple setups that a lot of people just breeze right past because they assume no one would ever hunt this setup. Like, I would never go here. Nobody in their right mind would hunt this. It's just a dumb place to be. And then that's where your matriarch doe is, or that's where your massive buck is. And that's where they lock down during the rut. And then I guess to your second point there, sorry if I'm getting long-winded, about the ethical part, you know, people are always looking for information. And I guess the simpler way to say what we're trying to do is we're trying to increase the amount of bandwidth that people can use to ingest meaningful information. So a really low bandwidth way of understanding deer is by just getting in the woods and hunting them. And like for me, it might take you 8, 9, or 10 years to get really good if you're just doing it on your own without a mentor, of just switching setups and trying to get out of ruts and learning things. That's a really low resolution, low bandwidth way of doing something. And then you might ask some buddies who have killed some good deer. So now you're upping your bandwidth. And I'm using that word bandwidth like you would say internet bandwidth, right? The amount of information that you're taking in. So you might update that bandwidth, and you know, now you're talking to 2 or 3 guys or somebody who grew up on the property. So your bandwidth's getting even better. And then you are putting cameras out, and you are sending, you know, those camera shots off, and you are asking someone who really knows their stuff, maybe maybe your friend is friend with a pro staff hunter or something like that, and you're saying, hey, how would you hunt this property knowing that deer are in these areas at this time? And then he gives you some suggestions, or she gives you suggestions, and now you're really getting on deer. You're really getting in there. And then you might go on YouTube and get all of this information from, you know, the Vitals Live, like the podcast that you host, where you can talk with someone like, you know, Dan Infalt or John Eberhart, who have been, you know, doing this for 50 years and really know what they're talking about. And then now you have the opportunity to ask them, hey, here's my you know, type this address in, please go look at this piece of property. And they're saying, where are your stands? Here, here, and here. Okay, you should be over here. This is where we think you should put a camera, where the deer are. Now you're really increasing your bandwidth on how you do it. Or another person you might say is like your grandfather, who's been hunting your farm for 75 years, and he knows they're all in this little finger row of trees where you never go to. They're just on this little finger row of trees, and every time they're cutting corn or making hay, they see them in here. And you're getting those expert opinions. So what we're doing is, for the people who can't pay for the Vitals Live, or for the people who can't hunt their grandfather's public land or private land, or for the people who can't go out and ask 2 or 3 buddies, or they might not have a hunting buddy, or maybe they're embarrassed to ask these questions because they don't want to not know what they're talking about. They can get their bandwidth going at a cheaper cost. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not going to be able to tell you with my app exactly where deer are going to be on the ground and exactly when they're going to be moving, but I am going to be able to give you good ideas. You know, I'm not going to give you the exact answer. You're still going to have to get out there. You're still going to have to be quiet. You're still going to have to maintain your discipline. You're still going to have to sit on stand for hours on end. It's just, I have improved your bandwidth to make considerations and to plan your hunt, and then told you the best day to do it, no differently than you'd be able to get from if you had the money to pay an outfitter, or you had access to a Dan Infalt, or you had your grandfather who's been on that land for 70 years. So we're automating those best practices, and we're sticking them on a phone, I guess is another, I'm sorry, very long-winded answer to, you know, what's the ethic involved here. And the ethic is we're just making sense of things for people in a way that we are using data that we know is truthful, so that you can be judicious with your paid time off and your being away from your family, or maximize your family's time in the field so your son or your daughter is seeing more deer and they want to get interested in it. And we're making it available to everybody. So really what we're doing is we're taking expert information and we're making it affordable.
Sure. And I mean, you keep saying like, you know, long-winded or whatever. The beauty of podcasts is that it's a long form conversation, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
You can, that's why the rabbit holes and all this stuff. I mean, that's why people tune in, is because, it's not an infomercial. It's not
Sure.
we're getting all of this. And it's funny that you say that, because, there's, I mean, Dan Infalt has a whole bunch of stories of killing deer in the parking lot, and, having to circle around and things like that. We've got 240 acres in the UP, and nobody ever kills big deer up there. It's just this, we've got 10, 15 guys that go out on 240 acres, have a deer camp. It's always, it was always gun hunting. It was always this. And since I've not been going up there for gun season, just because gun season doesn't appeal to me. But my uncle was walking down the road that you walk in, that you drive in to our property. And there was, for us, a good deer is over 100 inches. So,
Yeah.
there's a 110-inch 8-point bedded in the cattails that you can see our cabin from, and
Yeah.
he can't even believe it. And he couldn't, he was just so dumbfounded. His rifle wasn't even loaded and couldn't take a shot. And the deer was gone before that. But that same thing of those overlooked spots, or where, how many, that deer didn't get to be that big or that age up there. It probably was there every November 15th, a rifle opener, just watching us walk by, blaze orange,
Yeah.
no big deal. So to the ethical whatever point, let's put it in another scenario, which maybe you can kind of wrap your head around and kind of explain. But like, so to guys that are in the military with land navigation, right? So compass, map, reverse azimuths, and
Yeah.
trying to figure that out. And then you've got GPS. So now we can just give people a GPS, or iron sights versus ACOG, old
Yeah.
core, that whole
Yeah.
thing. The ability to do that without that. So you've got somebody that's new, and so the correlation I'm going for here is like, okay, so you get this app and it just tells you this is where I need to be, whatever. um how is that learning process, or the, I don't know, the heart of it, you know what I mean, like the basis of learning these things versus just, it helps you, but killing a deer for social media, or because everybody kills a 140 on Instagram.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess one of the things, there's a great quote, and I'm trying to remember who said it. And it's like the quote was, God invented man, and then Samuel Colt made them all equal, I think is how the quote goes, right?
Yep.
It's kind of the same thing here. Is everyone is a hunter, and people's ability to stay invested and wanting to hunt, for a lot of people, especially in the beginning, is proportional to how often they see deer. And if you got somebody who's new to hunting and is really putting their time and their money and spending time away from their families to do it, or to put food on the table, more importantly, no one should overlook our ability to level set everyone's experience in the woods, and make that attainable for somebody. And what we're aiming to do with these apps is, beyond just giving that answer, is to tell them the why, because machine learning for people can feel kind of black boxish, like you're just like putting in a variable and then you're getting an answer and you're not quite sure why you're getting that answer, but you got someone like me just telling you to trust me. We are looking at ways, a few ways that we're doing it is, we're going to start hyperlinking studies and YouTube videos of explanations to our recommendations and the widgets that we have in our common operating picture, so that we're not just throwing answers at people, we're getting them to understand. Because if we can get, my goal for people with this app is, I'm sorry if I'm not answering the question precisely, or your statement, but is to help confirm their presuppositions about how they should hunt a property, or when they have those presuppositions, they might be getting stuck in a rut like we all do because they know a buck's moving through an area or a doe that they want to harvest is moving through an area. We can give them a separate way to look at the problem and maybe make some considerations that they wouldn't have otherwise made. So that's kind of like, level setting it and making everyone more equal, which I think is a good thing, especially because deer hunters numbers are lowering. You know what I mean? There's not as many people. I think we peaked in like 2012 or 2013, but not as many people are hunting now as were hunting then, or numbers are going down in places. So this is, again, one of those ways to make sure we're getting max participation in this, and also that people remain interested and keep wanting to do it, so that this thing, we need to be stewards for this to make sure it goes into the future. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And wrapping it in technology is a good way of doing that.
Yeah. And I mean, I completely agree with you as far as like getting more hunters or hunter retention, and the, not seeing deer, is definitely discouraging, as well as running into other hunters and, all of those sorts of things. I guess, where do you see the future of hunting? Because like I said, in the opening of this, for myself, like going on your website and trying to like wrap my head around this, it was like, what in the world? And
Yeah.
now, um, it, I guess you would have a better idea of, I guess, your competitors at this point. I mean, is this, are you guys the only ones that are doing this, or is this something that's coming regardless if it's you or someone else?
It's certainly coming. Using machine learning and using, automating our deer's reasoning process in the way that we do it, the highly statistical and neural network way, is the way to do it. No one is building, Tesla is not building using regression models or statistical analysis to drive a car. You know what I'm saying? They are using machine learning, which is replicating the way that we do object detection, object recognition, and object avoidance when these cars are driving down the highway. You can't do it with the statistical method. And just in that, you're trying to show a machine how a car should safely navigate a roadway. We are showing a machine the way that a deer, under general circumstances, will navigate the deer woods. So I think this is certainly the future, and if we weren't to do it, someone else would do it. And as far as the future of hunting is concerned, I think this is the way everyone will go, and it's going to be who's got the access to the data, who can clean the data the best, and do the best prediction. And that really leverages on who's using the right models and who's got the most data. So, the other guys who are doing prediction movement right now, or prediction forecasts, are using like esoteric or they're using one-off studies where someone might have studied a deer herd with some GPS collars for 2 or 3 weeks, and then they notice, or even a year, and here's how they work, here's how these deer moved in this area. But what they're not doing is they're not doing 2 million points from Texas, 3.5 million points from Southern Alabama, 1.6 million points from Maryland, 2.5 million points from North Dakota, 3.5 million points from Saskatchewan and Alberta. And the only way to do that right now is to get the amount of compute that's available in a machine learning or in a neural network, tag that data that's meaningful, and then test it using future data. That's the only way to do this en masse. There isn't another way right now that would do it. So, and that's kind of where we hang our hat on, and is that we are using truth data. We have tons of data, and the data can't lie. When you've got hundreds and hundreds of deer generating millions and millions of points, the predictions that the models make have to be that way, because if they weren't, they wouldn't be accurate, and then we wouldn't use the model. Does that make sense?
Yeah. For sure. It's just a matter of, like I said, I just wanted to know, like, obviously there's going to be some haters, some detractors, and some people that,
Sure.
blah blah blah. This isn't ethical. This isn't, how can they do that? But I mean, I would guarantee you that my phone is sitting right here. We're talking about this, and I'll pull up Facebook, and then there'll be an ad for base map or something that we talked about on here. There'll be places to visit in Maryland. I mean, so people are getting our information one way or the other, and so the deer hunting thing about that isn't so far fetched.
Yeah, and it's kind of what I said before. If using a machine learning algorithm to do prediction on when and where deer will be moving is unethical, then so is asking Dan Info where deer are going to be made, because 95% of the time they're going to be making the same predictions. So if asking someone who really knows their stuff is unethical, then so is asking a machine. Then yes, you know what I'm saying? Because the machine is going to get it wrong just as much as somebody who's been spending 50 years in the field, because deer are animals and they don't all do the things lock, stock. They're not, all the same. So, and that's why, I welcome haters. Haters are a good thing. And people that don't like your tech, or maybe want to see your tech presented or done in a different way, are our greatest points of learning. We can learn a lot from those people, as long as they're honest about what their problems or their or what they have against what we're doing. We can try to tether it and to help those people out to see what we're doing. But like I said before, if this is unethical, then so is asking somebody who really knows a lot about deer hunting, because that's really what this is. It's an automated person who knows a lot about deer hunting.
And so throughout this conversation, this kind of like came to my mind, and we can transition it into, like you said, this is now the when, and then the next phase is going to be the why. If you can get into that process of why you don't have the why right now, you only have the when. But what I'm saying is, like, as this conversation like progressed and we were talking about, like, is it fair, or is it are you going to have all the people set up on the same thing? Do you think in the future that you'll have the ability, and I guess it just stems from everything being of monetary value or equal playing field or whatever, but be able to break the app down into tiers to say, this is for X amount, we'll show you doe movement, then 1.5-year-old bucks, then 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, and so forth? I mean, do you have that data right now? I mean,
yeah, so we generally know how does select bedding areas, and we can juxtapose that from how a buck would select bedding, and then young bucks versus older bucks. And boy, sometimes when you see where, especially a very mature, like we're talking 5.5 to 7.5-year-old buck is bedding, you just can't get to him. It's just one of those things where he is, I think I said it, and I think we were talking offline just on a phone call, but I've seen the data where a buck lives and dies on the side of a hill,
mm-hmm.
and no one can get to him. Because he's what they'll do is they'll bed on these tiny bowls that are on a ridge somewhere, where they are getting thermal and overhead scent, and then crosswind. They're getting it because of the way that the bowl funnels the thermals from the side. You can't get on that deer. And he might do 1 or 2 excursions a year, where you need to be exactly where he is the one time that he might walk there a year. But I've seen it where a buck he does his dispersion. He might be 2.5 years old when he settles to this area, and he dies at 8, and no one ever saw him. He just did not go to where the corn feeders were. He did not. He spent his time where he knew he had some acorns on the side of his hill, and he went without during the rut and lost 35% of his body mass just cruising that one ridge, and no one ever saw him. So that's kind of like the to answer that second part. To answer your first part about the why, one of the things that is from a market perspective is difficult about machine learning is I make the comparison to where you can measure when maybe a person's when a person might have a physical reaction to a temperature change, or like when does person A start to feel cold versus person B. Like me, I'm always sweating. It doesn't matter. Even when it's 35 degrees out and I'm sitting on a tree not moving, I'm still hot. I'm still sweating. It never ends for me. But then, you know, my oldest daughter is freezing when it's 85 degrees outside. And you can't ask that person, why are you cold? You know what I'm saying? The body produces that answer and tells you to seek heat or to seek comfort. And there's nothing you can do about that other than trying to condition yourself and getting used to things. But you're not in charge of that part of the brain that's making those decisions. It's automated. The same way that if you were to ask somebody, why does your heart beat that fast? Well, I know it beats faster because I have to oxygenate more blood because I'm running. And after I run out of that ability to really oxygenate blood at around 20 minutes, I start burning sugar. That is programmed into the head, and it's a part of the brain that regulates that. But there's no question that you can ask of the human brain to produce that result. It's the same thing with machine learning. It learns that things do these things this way, and then it makes the prediction based on that. But what we can do, and what we are trying to do right now, is we're trying to figure out new and interesting ways to pull the machine learning system to try to understand, all right, when we tweak dew point just this much, how does it produce differently? Or when we tweak temperature just this much, how does it produce differently? Or how does it change how this buck might do it? And then, you know, we're going to have to do this for probably the next year or so, but we're going to have to keep tweaking little bits and little bits just to see how we're affecting the reasoning process of this machine. And then once we do that, we start understanding these things, we can start engaging with things in machine learning called adversarial neural networks, where we can game a neural network against itself and tweak little parts of it, and then allow it to tweak itself, and then get a good understanding of why it's making these decisions. But it's just such a long process to do that right now we're just trying to get the answer out. And we may attach some like YouTube videos saying, you know, generally the why, and we might attach some studies that support those things. But until we really can get deep into this and probably hire, you know, a couple of more guys just to work on that, answering the why can get difficult.
And you were saying that like this machine learning takes millions, if not billions of data points. And the more that you have, the more the machine can figure out through that. You said like terabytes on terabytes on terabytes.
Yeah, millions of data points, and depending on what you're doing, billions of data points. You know, you just have to think, you know, every time a deer registers a new GPS hit on a collar, we bounce that off of like 12 to 15 pieces of data, depending on how much data we have for that area. So that network has to learn 12 to 15 different variables assigned to that one piece of movement. And then that deer might have that collar on for 7 years, and there might be 400,000 pieces of movement lashed up against 10 to 15 data points per movement piece. So like I said, it's impossible to do a statistical analysis of that. It just has to be done in the void, in the vacuum. And I hate using the word black box. It's kind of the way you have to describe it. But there is method to the madness, and we know that because testing would fail if it wasn't, as we ingested new data, we wouldn't be able to make meaningful and accurate predictions if it wasn't correct. And that's the way we measure ourselves, if that makes sense.
And so in the future, how are you, like going forward, how are you validating these processes? I mean, because you've got, you know, outside of putting data against data, right? You know, for the hunter, and you've got, you know, I don't know, I'd imagine that probably 45 states are whitetail states. I mean, I'm trying to think of like who wouldn't be hunting, but how are you validating that for a guy in, you know, Oklahoma, a guy in Maine, it's all big woods, a guy in Florida, a guy in, because I know you talked about there's different, you know, the Southeast, the deer move way different than they do in the Midwest.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first way we validate it is that thing I've talked about before, which is, we'll get into contact with a new deer biologist, or a new study will be conducted by deer biologists that we work with. And we will test our data and see how accurate we're testing for those deer that we've never seen before. That's the first way. And then the second way is, as people start using this, we're going to depend on those user stories. Hey, I've been hunting this property my whole life, or I've been hunting this piece of public land my whole life. I've never gotten on good deer here, or I've never seen deer here in some cases. And, the first time I fired this thing up, it was putting me on deer. I mean, that's really the way that we measure ourselves, or we're going to validate ourselves, because scientifically, sure, that's the prudent way and the honest way to do it. But if this doesn't translate to people seeing deer or having their opportunity at deer, it's not going to matter.
And where do I mean, so I know we talked about this previously on the vitals, and you guys can check out the Spartan Forge YouTube, because that's up there, and you can go through it. He's got everything up on the screen, and kind of goes through a little bit of it, and we dive into this a little bit. But so where does hunting pressure come into that? And what I'm thinking about specifically is, like, so let's say that I get your app, and this would be a perfect example, is, like I said, we've got 240 acres in the UP.
Mm-hmm.
Your machine would be able to say, these are the spots, and we could look and we could cross-reference where deer had been taken in the past and where our stands are set up currently. I could give it to my brother. So I've got two brothers. One is a very passionate hunter, and he goes out to South Dakota every year and hunts, and he hunted North Dakota last year, and I mean, he's killed some good deer, but he is more in line with, like, the way that I hunt, and we do here on the podcast. I have another brother who goes up to our property solely to be not working.
Yeah,
So
sure.
I could give him the app and say, this is where it says you need to be, and that would be a perfect trial by fire. But if we've got 5-6 other guys on the property, that
Yep.
might skew the data.
Yeah, absolutely. It will skew the data, because if you, for instance, at some point we'll get to a feature where we'll have enough deer where the app will be able to tell you, here's where we see mature bucks bedding on this property. That we don't have that amount of data yet. There's only so many times that you can have a tagged 5.5 or 6.5-year-old deer. We've got a bunch, but we don't have enough to train a network. And when we do, we'll be able to say, here's where a 6.5-year-old deer would bed on this property. If you hit that property every day, that buck's never going to be there. So to kind of answer your question, for the really hard to hunt places, it's twofold. A, it's going to be being able to point out the really hard to get to spots where only a mature buck would bed. But then B, it's going to require a catalog of data where you're feeding the app where you have been sitting on that property up to this point and where there hasn't been any human intrusion. So that's going to be where that catalog, that historical diary of data will have to sit on the app and say, okay, you've been lighting up this part of the property. We suggest that you move over here and let this cool off. And again, that'll be something we'll be able to back up with scientific studies that we have found, saying, how often you should hunt in certain areas and when you should leave certain areas alone. So I guess that's kind of like a two-pronged way of answering the question.
Yeah.
But one of it will involve tagging of where you are going, so that the machine can say, okay, based on that, here's how I would change what you're doing.
Yeah, can you expound on that a little bit? I remember you saying that you had some studies, or that you've got some tagged deer that were there were no deer, no hunters in the area or whatever. And then you put a hunter in there, and then you track the deer movement based on intrusion.
Yeah, so this was a study, and might get the amount of days wrong, but I can Google, or I can send you it, and maybe you can post the study in the comments. But it was a study from Auburn where they had put they put hunters in the field and watched how mature bucks were reacting to how the hunters were entering and hunting the area, and coming out. And I want to say that it was, I could get this wrong, but I want to say it was at least 5 to 6 days before they had patterned back to that area in the night once the hunter had been through it. And then it was like 10 days, and I could get this wrong. Like I said, we'll post it and hunters can read it for themselves, before they had patterned, like of the woods being left alone, before they had patterned back to that during the day. If they were moving it there during the day before the hunter started going there. So
Yeah.
about 10 days.
And so that's huge information for guys. I mean, because generally speaking, like, I don't know very many people that take 10 days for a hunt. You know, everything is like, you know, a 7-day period, 9-day period, you know, weekend to weekend type thing. So if you go into an area and booger it up in the wrong time,
Yeah, on the wrong
like,
day.
it you know, it's
Yeah.
can be really discouraging, right?
Right. And that's why we have the when feature, because it's that union of the when and the where, because the where depends on the when, and the when depends on the day. So you can have the best bowl on the side of a ridge where you think a buck, or a bench on the side of a ridge where you know a buck's bedding, but if the wind is not right and the time of day is not right, it's not going to matter. He either won't be there, or he saw you coming before you ever got out of your vehicle, because he's watching the trail up that you might use to get into that area. So the hunt was over before it started, because you didn't go on the right day or the right wind or the right time, and he was able to wind you or see you as you were making your way up there. Yeah, and those studies are super interesting. And like I said, I'll send that to you afterwards. I want to make sure I get the amount of days right on that. But that is to say, you also, I think everyone has heard the story of, we have this deer camp that's got 1,000 acres, and we run 10 to 15 stands on it, and everyone was going to their favorite stand, and then there was a kid who didn't have a stand, so we just told him, hey, go over here, and we sent him someplace that no one ever sees anyone. Then he kills a 150-inch buck on that property, because he was going a place, that buck was bedding in a place where he knew none of the other hunters were going. And that kind of speaks to that first point about the areas that they select based on when humans have been in there, or how often humans go into it.
And I guess as like a broad stroke overview, like, who does this benefit the most, or where do you see this being implemented most effectively?
The public land hunter, without a doubt. I'm a public land hunter. It's my passion to I see it as the highest challenge, and it kind of sounds kind of weird, but you might know what I'm talking about. It's the closest thing I can get to recreating the energy and the sense of fulfillment that I got conducting combat operations. Getting on a piece of public land, and like one of the 2017 bucks I killed was a 150-inch public land buck. And it was a scrape he was working in front of me. It felt like a half hour when I saw him working the first scrape, and I was waiting for him to get to the one that was right in front of me. And then you put that arrow in the boiler room, and it's as if your entire body's full of acid when you're doing it. It's very similar feeling to doing work for the military overseas. And undoubtedly, private landholders will benefit from this, especially if they listen, because by virtue of not going on the land every day, because not every day is going to be a high prediction. So just by virtue of letting the land cool off for the private land hunter, it will help. But without a doubt, this is built for the public land hunter. This is a public land hunter's app.
Okay. Yeah, and that was my thoughts exactly, just in the fact of, like, so let's say you've been going to a spot, and you thought you had it figured out, and there's another guy there, or it's the wind is wrong or anything like that, and you're like, oh, I want to check out this spot. It would seem like you could just pull up this app and say, well, there's a public land place over here. I put that in, I look at it, and it says, okay, this is where I need to be because of the wind. You can go in there, use your own, woodsmanship or whatever. You can go in there and say, okay, well, that's where it says I need to be. this looks about right, pick a tree and get up it, and you're already that far ahead. It's not necessarily, and that's what I was getting at with that like cheat sheet comment, because like I was
Yep.
saying, it sounds like you've got it figured out without the app. Like you're doing just fine without doing all this stuff. But I think with all of this study and everything that you've been putting in, your heart and soul into this, you've just learned it on you and the machine are doing it, and you're just trying to pass it
Yeah.
along to the
Yeah.
rest.
And the other thing I think it does is, like, when you've got a 12,000 acre public hunting property, it's going to be able to cut down 90% of that area that you might have had to spend on your foot scouting, or sitting there like I used to do and tacking on a map with a pen. Like, all right, I'm going to check out this ridge. I'm going to check out this ridge. All right, these fingers here. There's an intersecting point here. I want to check this out. All of those things that you have to do, it can, zero all that in and say, just on this piece of public land, focus on these areas for your scouting or your hunting. So kind of just distilling a lot of that information and just leaving the hunter to choose from the most pragmatic spots to go and either scout or hunt.
Like that right there. That's the way I do it now.
Yep,
Some of what I did today,
absolutely.
but I just dropped a whole bunch of pins and then
Yep.
circled around and said, I need to do that. And what's funny about that is, you use the analogy of like Dan Infalt, but Dan Infalt, and I just watched one of the latest YouTube videos from Garrett Prawl, but he said the same thing. Is like, you take this and you just outline the things that you're not going to go, that I'm not going to check out that. You're going to look at this 4,000 acre piece of property in one afternoon, and you're only checking the areas that you think will be good. And it would take you weeks or months to go through all of the rest of that. And I think
Yep.
that's huge. I mean, I'm trying to be as objective as possible, because like I said, like when I looked at this, I was like, oh, there's no way. This is just a weird, thing out there. And then, as you explain it, and like thinking about all that, to say you have 30 years of weather data. I mean, as far as your bandwidth is concerned, I can go buy a farmer's almanac that'll tell me. I mean, if you got your old Garmin GPS, it'll tell you whether it's a good day to hunt or not. It'll be like, that'll
Yeah.
a smiley face or a sad face or like a so-so. It tells you good fishing days, bad fishing days. And it's, somewhat based on the same thing, but it's very rudimentary.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And it's just, and another way to say it quite simply is just, it's just another tool in the kit bag. It's no different from anything else. And, when you talk about increasing odds on land, I would say it increases a person's odds no more than putting a long range rifle in someone's hand. I mean, if you just tell somebody, hey, here's a long range rifle, and you go and hunt this ridge over here, that person's going to have some pretty good success. This isn't an exact science. There's guesswork involved here, because you have to pick a spot. We're going to be presented with many spots. You're going to have to pick one and go hunt that spot for that day. And you're still rolling the dice. No different than anything else. We're just trying to help people, especially, you might have 14 days of vacation a year, or 7 days, or 3 days, or you might only be able to hunt weekends. You don't want to waste it, hunting the wrong area or at the wrong time or the wrong place, and you don't have the time to go out and scout and be on the, like you or I might have, where we might spend a Saturday or a Sunday just trekking miles and miles and miles. Some guys don't have that. And also, hey, they want to spend time with their families and their time off as well. And they don't want to be trekking the mountains either. So like I said, it's kind of like a great equalizer that makes sure that everyone gets a shot. And I think if we continue to do this and we move with the pace of technology, we will keep people interested. And really, that's the overall goal. And people might say, well, if people aren't interested, I don't want them hunting. It's like, well, maybe A, maybe they might not know they're interested, and B, the more people are interested, the more access we'll have to public lands. So we should be getting people interested and finding new avenues to keeping people invested in their pursuit of whether it's a doe or a cow or a bull or a whitetail.
And so I know you've got some other things like that are coming down the pike, and it kind of goes along with this. But the obvious follow up question, at least to me, and I mean we've talked about this before, is if all 11 million hunters out there, whitetail hunters, download your app, are they going to run into each other at the same place?
I don't know, because I'll be in the Bahamas. No, I'm just joking. No, they will not run into when we do integrate, whether we integrate with a mapping company, which there's possibilities on the horizon, or we develop our own mapping portion. We will make sure that we deconflict those, and then also that we user strip that data, and we give people a general area to focus on, and we don't have hunters overlapping. So, we will field a free version of this that will give people some of what is available from a prediction standpoint, but it'll also work to make sure that people are not hunting over each other, or you're not going into an area that was just hunted that morning where you don't know that it's been blown up with scent and that there's no one there. So yeah, we will be doing those things as well when we field the where feature.
So that to me, and I haven't had this conversation with you. I've had it with Walter, and like I put you in touch with Walter. But the scariest part for me about the whole thing is kind of just that, right? So it seems like you would be able to tweak the app, or the machine would be able to learn where people were that day on that thing. But like what I told Walt is, I said, could you imagine being able to hack into the Hunting Publics or Dan Infalt's or Andy May's Onyx and get those points? I mean, and I think that is one of those. It doesn't end up being like on the hunting ethics side of it, but it ends up being like on the overall ethical side of it. Is like,
yeah, I mean, I guess the first point of order on that is it's illegal. So if someone was doing that for deer points, it's like, oh man, I mean, you must be really committed. B, it's difficult to do that type of work, hacking. I know from experience. And C,
allegedly, right?
oh yeah, no, I mean as being a protector of networks,
Okay.
not as an exalter of networks. I'm sorry, I should clarify my terms here. As a guy who wants to protect critical information,
Okay.
I can speak to that, attest to that. But also, there's a few ways that we can crack this nut. One is a hunter can give away how much. Does he want to say he's on 1/2 of this public land? Does he want to say he's in 1/4 of this area or a square mile of this area on this public land? Or does he not want to report his stuff at all? And if he doesn't want to do that, that's his or her prerogative, because they can just as easily turn the GPS off on their phone. So we will give people that choice. But I can say from our perspective that we will go through a lot of painstaking efforts to protect everyone's honey holes. And it'll be up to them what kind of resolution they want to give away on where they're hunting. It'll just be, hey, I want to know when someone's 800 yards as the crow flies away from my position. And then they can choose whether or not they want to keep walking in there and molest my hunt or not. But it'll be no different from hunters right now when they're walking up to a public land station where they might say, hey, they've sectored it off and said, hey, I'm hunting here today in 1C, I'm hunting here today in 1P or whatever. It'll be a similar interaction to that. So, I mean, if somebody's got a honey hole and they don't want to give it up and they are so afraid of, somebody hacking an app that they don't want that, sure, if you're pulling some big bucks out of there, I might understand that frame of mind. And they don't have to bring that in there, but then they can't be upset on the flip side of the coin when, a hiker is coming through there who's not hunting, but they might be using an app that shares data with ours, and they walk right through your setup and blow your hunt. So it's a double-edged sword, I guess, is the best way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, it just to me, it goes like it's twofold, right? Because everybody is a conspiracy theorist, and we've all seen all the Jason Bourne movies and Jack Reacher and everything. And you obviously have friends at the NSA, so you can do
How about that?
whatever you want to do. But the other side of that is we talk about this 80-year-old farmer or the Amish that we've got around here that, they're not giving away their information. They're not on their phone. They're not, doing any of that stuff. So it can only be as good as the data points, right? So you can't say that there wasn't anybody in there, but you can just
Right.
all you can speak to is the trends and whatnot. So
But I mean, if we get a lot of people using, oh, I'm sorry, I thought you cut out. I thought you were finished speaking.
I was saying just two different sides of it. You've got the people that are completely offline, and then you've got your friends that can like just send a drone strike to my house right now.
Yeah, so it certainly is that, but I think when we get the right amount of people using this app or one like it, or the hunt, it's a prudent step for all of the mapping apps to say, look, we're going to create a user stripped centralized data repository so that people aren't stepping on each other when they're hunting. We're not going to give away spots, but it might be a good idea that these apps communicate cross-platform so that we can help hunters out from not messing up each other's hunts, but also from not stacking people in the same area on a piece of public land, and also a safety perspective. So there's a lot of good reasons to be sharing this data when we're in the field. And I mentioned safety last, but I should have probably said it first. And again, your phone's already reporting this data. I mean, we could get into this, but I mean, if you think Google isn't storing this stuff in a cache somewhere as you're running around, or storing your searches so that can give you the best advertising, or Facebook isn't doing the same thing, they're all doing it. It's already being done. If you've got a smartphone and you consent to sharing your GPS location, which 95% of people do, 99% of people do, it's already happening. So the question becomes, do we want to be judicious about how we share this information and use it for a noble purpose like safety and improving the hunting experience, or not? And that's kind of like a personal question everyone needs to answer.
So is yours turned on?
My GPS is turned on, yes.
Okay. All right. All right.
There was a time in my life where it wasn't, but these days it's always turned on.
All right. So you spend all this time putting all this information and all this time and effort into the hunting side of it and where these deer are and everything. And like, so John's not here. His normal question, like his 5 words from the podcast would be, so what bow setup are you shooting? Like, so what's your bow, arrows, broadheads?
So I shoot 2 bows. I shoot a traditional recurve that was made for me by a friend who's from Montana. And then I shoot a PSE Stinger. And I shoot the Carbon, I shoot Carbon Express, and I'm also trying to remember the other one that I shoot. It's the black one. The name's escaping me because you're putting me on the button here.
The hunting podcast.
It's the black one with the steel on it.
The FMJs.
The FMJs, yeah. Yep. And then Muzzy.
Okay. So
I just have always stuck with the fixed blades. I don't know why, but for me, being an engineer in the military, I've always, and just pragmatically, anytime you introduce more moving parts, the first law of thermodynamics is going to vote, and then more things tend towards disorder. So for me, it's like I've never had a problem with a Muzzy MX3, so I'm just going to always shoot it.
So then why are you shooting FMJs?
What do you mean?
Well, so it's carbon wrapped metal. They're aluminum. They can bend.
Oh yeah, I mean, I haven't thought it through that much. I guess maybe I should think about it more. I mean, I just like the FMJs because they're hard and they're fast.
Yeah.
And I always get great pass through on them, but or it seems that way. Maybe it's just something I've tricked myself into. But yeah, I guess you've just exposed a flaw in my reasoning. Well, so wait, what kind of arrows should I be shooting if this is the case? Is there something there's less moving parts in?
Well, I mean, so like when you get down to the like nuts and bolts of it. If you were to ask, like, so I'm going to answer for John. So John has shot FMJs, and he actually our last post, which took off because I made a meme out of it, and it was a very people said it was photoshopped. John was bear shaft tuning in FMJ. He doesn't shoot them. He just had some laying around from when he did. Shot one through the paper, through his garage door, and through the hood of his Jeep, and it hit the hood latch, exploded, and went straight down and just nicked the fins on the air conditioning cooler there.
That is awesome.
It's a 2018 JL with aluminum hood, and the hood is like $1,100. So his wife wasn't happy basically from the safety aspect of it, because that could have been one of the kids out there or something like that.
Sure.
And all of that, but the pride also kicked in.
Wow.
But he shoots the Easton Axis, the 5mm, and that's what he leans towards. I've been shooting Black Eagles. I'm building a set of Black Eagle Spartans right now for our elk hunt, and they're I'll use them whitetail hunting. But if you want to get like way down the rabbit hole of like carbon fiber, the best, almost like I believe that they are proprietary. The Day 6 arrows are just amazing.
Day 6.
And I've got a set of those that I'm building for whitetail as well. But the carbon's almost twice as thick as the normal. They're kind of like a micro diameter. They shoot an outsert system. They're pretty badass.
And how much are those weighing in at?
I want to say that they're like about 9 grains an inch, depending on what shaft you're shooting.
Sturdy.
The Spartans that I'm shooting right now are like, I believe they're 10 or 11, because I'm shooting the 250s. I'm putting 250 grains up front, so I had to balance the spine out for that. So, but John, like I said, so the way that this podcast works is I'm just the mouth and the question answer and the personality or whatever, and John's the genius. So when you were talking about the Arduinos and whatever, like John has an electrical background, and he
gotcha.
But he works on cranes too, so he works on controllers and 440 3-phase and all.
Sure.
So he's, when you said that, I was like, where is he at? Like, come on. Perfect. But yeah, so when you're talking about like less things to fail, I mean, you shoot that Full Metal Jacket into the dirt one time and then you just put it back in your quiver. There's a good chance, depending on like what you're shooting, that it's bent. I mean,
there's something there. Yeah. I'll definitely consider that, because no different from what we're doing with the machine learning. I'm trying to isolate and account for as many variables as possible to keep things as simple as possible. You talk to somebody who's a pro in anything, whether it's basketball, football, archery, it doesn't matter. And it's like fundamentals and repeatability are like the two things. It's like focus on the fundamentals and make things repeatable. Don't make them difficult. As err as much on the side of order, as far away from chaos as you can be, and then find a way to repeat that. And that's like the very simplistic way to describe it. I try to, as much as everything I do, so no matter what I'm doing.
In comes the traditional bow. What's that setup? John gives me so much crap because again, I tout myself as the world's worst bow hunter. It's easier, just for the simple fact of like everything that can go wrong has gone wrong. I don't know what I'm doing. I just get lucky here and there. And John's like, you can't switch to traditional until you do this or this or this or whatever. Just because he's like, you're just a fuck up. Like you cannot do that just yet. So I would love to kill a deer with the traditional equipment. So what's your traditional setup?
Yeah, so it's a handmade bow, a recurve. A friend of this is another long story for another podcast probably, but I grew up basically doing these things called, it's primitive camping. I don't know if you've heard of it or not, but it's called like a rendezvous.
Oh yeah, you dress up in all the
Yeah, like buckskinning and all of that
Oh
stuff.
yeah.
So
Yep.
I grew up doing that stuff, and a friend of mine was a bowyer, and he had made me a recurve. I guess the best, it pulls about 50 pounds, and it's very comparable to like one of like an old like Fred Bear. Nothing fancy to it whatsoever. And I've had that one for about 6 years, and I've only killed maybe 4 or 5 deer with it. I've killed 4 deer with it, and I don't take it on public land. Like when I'm hunting public land, I got that, the bow I have, I use on public land because I want to be dialed in, and I just don't trust myself beyond 20 yards with that traditional bow. So I'm mostly using, I would say 75% of the time I'm using that compound.
And
And
what
that one's,
arrow setup and broadhead setup with the traditional?
I shoot the same ones.
Okay.
Yep, same ones.
So are you
Like,
shooting feathers off of your
what's that?
are
Oh,
you
the
feathers?
fletch, yeah, the
Yeah.
fletchlings. Yes, they're feathers. Yes, yeah. I should have said that. Those are feathers. But I just take those to like the Bass Pro and have them do them up.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, so that, I mean, that's where I'm at. So I've got a couple different like cheap recurves. I'm getting a good quality um recurve with longbow limbs, and the arrows are going to be the next thing. And I personally just love that instinctual shooting. And the guy that we went elk hunting, we stayed at his cabin out in Idaho 2 years ago, but he's only traditional, just from that simplicity fact, like where he's been out in the backcountry and broke a limb or cut a
Yeah, that's
string or
true.
something like that, and then you're stuck, you know. So
I'm really saying some mutually exclusive statements because you would think based on my minimizing amount of things that could go wrong, I would be going that way, but I'm not because I just don't trust myself beyond like 25 yards, like on a booner buck or something like that, to just like, oh man, if I just had my, if I missed, I always say to myself, if I just had my compound, I would have made that shot.
Yeah, but the same thing goes for archery hunting, is that it would, if I just had my bow, that, I mean, for me, like as soon as I got done with boot camp, I basically quit rifle hunting, because it's like when you're shooting 500 meters offhand, or from the prone open sights, there was no
Yep.
optics or any of
Yep.
that. It's like any deer that I see with a rifle, like I can kill it. Like I don't
Yeah,
have,
absolutely.
and so that same thing happens like every deer that I see. And so if I mean you could, it's one of the things that we go back and forth with a podcast. Like, we pigeonholed ourselves being like the Bowhunter Chronicles. John's a big fisherman, and we do this, and like kind of where we draw the line is crossbows. We want people to be out hunting, and we want them to be out there, but like it's always going to be a pissing contest. Like unless you did a self bow, made your own arrows, chewed the sinew, and made your string, like somebody's going to be like, well, you could have done it this way, or you could have did it this
Oh,
way,
right.
this
Yeah,
way.
absolutely.
But ultimately it ends up being like wherever you're comfortable. And that's the hard part, is saying I'm the same way, but like what you're saying is you're the problem. Like I'm like I can't at 25 yards, like I can't not, I don't have the self-control to, and
No,
I
absolutely.
totally feel it.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's just, I guess it's what I'm comfortable with, but I got the same feeling with you do about the rifle. Like after being in the military for so long, like shooting a rifle at that point almost feels like cheating. But then of course I say that and I would go somewhere and I don't see any deer. So maybe I just keep my mouth shut and take what I can get.
Right. So for everybody following along, you said September 1st. I mean, so
Yep.
this is going to come out this one will come out in like a couple days. So,
Yep.
where can they pick that up? Where is it going to be available? Where can they follow along with everything that's doing in the updates? And
Yeah. So they can go to www.spartanforge, SPARTANFORGE.ai. And on there you'll be able to access the common operating picture, on a desktop, and we're looking. It will be accessible from your phone as well. We're not doing an app yet. We'll probably do an app with the Wear feature, but for the When feature, it's just going to be accessible through your phone or through a computer. And all of our Instagram, Facebook, and all of that stuff is available on there as well.
And so, real quick, just since you're saying that, and it's an app, and all the things that I have issue with, is there going to be anything that's available to be like downloaded, or like you said that there's going to be like a 14-day window? Because like where I hunt, there is no cell phone service. So, I mean, that would be something to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even with an app, you won't be able to access it without, because it's using a neural network. You have to hit that neural network to make the prediction. But we will make it available so the results would be searchable and storable on your phone. So when you do go hunting, you'll be able to look these things up before you go out there and put those down. And then, unfortunately, if you're going to be out there for more than a week or two, you'd probably have to go back and get cell service for the time being. But maybe that's something we can work on in the future. Maybe you can use or input your own weather or something, but that might be an interesting feature that we could look into.
Okay. Yeah. Just something that I thought of, because that's I have to download the maps to find my way back home, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's just that there's too much compute to try to store a local instance of the neural network on your phone, if that makes sense. It has to go off and touch a ton of machinery in order to make those predictions.
So if I was at home and I said, this is where I'm going to hunt, this is where I need to be, I guess I could screenshot it, but anyways, I could download that and say, okay, this is where.
And we'll make it so it's storable offline. Yep.
Awesome. Well, I do appreciate your time and, you coming on here. And like I said, like the in-person, being able to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, it makes it so much more clear than just kind of hearing it secondhand or trying to read about it. So I think it's extremely valuable.
Yeah, and thank you for having me on here. And I hope we can do it again sometime after the launch. And as people are getting through it and user feedback, we're very dynamic. We make changes. When we notice something's wrong, we make changes pretty quick. In fact, since the last podcast, working with some of our guys that are using this stuff out in the field right now for scouting and stuff, we're making changes that I think is going to make the user experience even better. So as we evolve, I think it'd be good to get back on here and let you guys know where we're going and where we're heading and how we're doing. And then also, if you guys do call-ins or anything like that, getting user feedback is always great.
Yeah, we can certainly do that. But yeah, I really appreciate it. I think that's all we got.
Yeah, thanks again.